Get started. This is really an exciting day for me. I'm going to explain why it is exciting that we have our guest, but it is mostly exciting because I have all of you here. And as you know, I am teaching 3 courses, all of which deal with collective memory and reputation. And I have brought you all in this one gathering today, and we are a little large for me to go around the room and show that I know all of your names, but I know almost all of your names, not maybe a few people. But what I wanted to do was to show this occasion by having you stand by groups. And so I would like my wonderful freshmen in my freshman seminar to just stand, and it is wonderful having you here. They are beginning this scholarly voyage that the rest of you have already been on, and they are going to find it as thrilling as you have been. Now I would like the students in 376 in Rumors and Reputations, if you would stand. Thank you all. Good seeing you again. This is their classroom, and the rest of you, you're just visitors. This is their place. And then I would like the wonderful graduate students in our program to stand. These are students of my collective memory seminar, and thank you for coming. And I want to issue a special invitation to, on Thursday, freshman seminar and the undergraduate 376 class. We're going to be discussing what we've learned here this afternoon, and we're going to have lively debates and discussions, whatever happens. Now the graduate students are going to be having their discussion on Tuesday, for about an hour on Tuesday. And I know that some of the students in 376 are sociology majors, and that perhaps some of you are thinking about graduate school in sociology or in some related discipline. So I would like to invite all of the students in 376, as well as the students in my freshman seminar, if you would like to participate in a graduate seminar on Tuesday, join us 2 o'clock till about 3 o'clock, Parks Hall 222, and we will have this lovely discussion, and you will have a lot of things to teach these graduates. They think they know it all, but they don't know what you know. So I welcome you if you can make it and if you're interested. It's not obviously not a requirement, but if you are thinking about graduate school in the social sciences, it might be a good way to get a sense of what a graduate seminar is like. And finally, I sent around an email. I know that these days people don't always check their emails, but an email inviting any and maybe all of you to dinner tonight after our discussion here. And if you are available, please feel free to come. Jarrell? The dinner? I was about to tell you. And I will say this with some hesitation, given what our topic is, but you will have to understand double meanings. We're talking about going to an Indian restaurant, but not a Native American.
Columbus was confused.
Right, right. So we're thinking of that. Yes.
They got TVs in there?
What's going? Oh, the World Series?
No, bullet.
I don't know. We're more exciting than that. You know, there are plenty of games. If you can join us, and as I mentioned in the email, the dinner is on us. So, there may not be such a thing as a free lunch, but there is a free dinner tonight. So if you'd like to join us, you're more than welcome. All right, so now I want to turn to introduction. The other exciting part of this afternoon is our speaker, and we were fortunate enough that the university was kind enough to provide support to bring an important speaker to you this afternoon. And as you know, I am John Evans, professor, and
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm a John Evans professor, and we have yes, that's right. Once that desk is open, it stays open. And I invited another John Evans professor from across the country. Our guest today is Professor Alan Gilbert. Alan is a member of the Josef Korbel School of International Studies at the University of Denver. And like Northwestern University, the University of Denver was founded by John Evans. Alan Gilbert received his BA degree from Harvard. He received a master's degree from the London School of Economics, and then returned to Cambridge to Harvard University for his PhD. He has been a fellow of the American Council of Learned Societies. He's been a member of the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton University. And most recently, he is the author of the book, Black Patriots and Loyalists, Fighting for Emancipation in the War of Independence. And those of us, for two of the classes, we've read Jill Lepore and talked about how Americans think about the War of Independence. And as she points out, very often we don't think about it in terms of race, but that is one of the central arguments that Professor Gilbert has brought forward in his book. But more relevant to the class today is the fact that Professor Gilbert serves at the University of Denver on their John Evans Investigation Committee. And that is what I've asked him to talk about today. And I will turn the floor over to my friend and my colleague, Alan Gilbert.
It means a lot to me to be here. And I have admired Gary Fine's efforts to tell the truth about John Evans, to tell the truth against Evanston, to tell the truth against Mount Evans, to tell the truth against Evans Boulevard and Downing Boulevard. Downing was the major who butchered women and children of Sand Creek and founded Colorado Springs. And Evans and Downing surround the University of Denver and then go far. I was also grateful to meet Heather and Forrest, the Native American students here. And it's wonderful that there's a diversity of people. My son and his stepdaughter before him went to an experimental K through 12 school where people helped educate each other. And it wasn't the kind of thing where everything is determined by grades and some sort of numerical thing put over your head. It was actually concerned with the substance of learning. The story I will tell you today is about the substance of learning. I speak as an historian of our political philosophy officer who has gone deeply into the issue of blacks in the American Revolution. At the crucial Battle of Yorktown, a German private who fought on the American side with the French walked around the field of battle and looked at the dead. And he said, the majority of corpses, Morgue, he wrote that in his diary, Moors. At the central battle of the American Revolution, black folks remained dead on both sides. Don't know about you, but nobody told me that. This was part of a movement fighting for abolition from the Caribbean in the 1750s, 20 rebellions, carried by sailors to London and Boston. And the idea of abolition was central in the American Revolution. It's been whited out. I use that phrase here. My book says that this story is central as a motor in the American Revolution, and in fact, that the American independence movement cannot be understood aside from this. And my own view is that the international impact of revolutions at that time, including the American Revolution and the British freed a lot of slaves in the American Revolution too, is shaped by the struggle for emancipation. Think of how you were taught about the American Revolution. And I would just say that historians they like the book a lot. I've gotten very favorable reviews. It was the lead book in Chicago in history last year. And historians had a very hard time wrapping themselves around this. Not just because I'm an outsider to the field originally, or that it is the one field in academia that if you write in, ordinarily you make a lot of money. In my case, I had to pay for having the book edited. So,
Can everyone in the back hear? If
oh,
you're,
you may not be able to because I speak softly sometimes. So I apologize.
Yes, in my case, they have to bring cotton for their ears to make sure I'm not too loud.
Oh dear. Well, we're a good combination, except they won't get me at all. Anyway, the point about this is that if you see things that are the subject of a founding amnesia or a founding myth, clearly, that will mean going against the grain. And whether you can be heard is a question. It's not given that you can be heard. I'm a Jew, and I was also in the civil rights movement. I was invited by Vincent Harding, who's a friend of mine and a close friend of Dr. Martin Luther King. He actually wrote the first draft of King's speech on Vietnam. He gave it on April the 4th, 1967, a year to the day before he was killed. And we went to visit the nonviolent resistance, which is a great part of the resistance in Palestine. And you can bet that that's a big secret in American newspapers. The territories are illegally occupied by Israel, and there is meticulous ethnic cleansing going on. And the analogy with what happened to slaves here came to mind easily on the part of many of the black folks who came in my talks. It was segregation or Jim Crow, if ever we had seen it. And here, the analogy is most with indigenous people. In Colorado, there's Arapahoe County. There are no Arapahoes in Arapahoe County. There's Arapahoe Road in Denver. There ain't no Arapahoes on Arapahoe Road. I've been told that Chicago was named for an onion that native indigenous people cultivated. But the indigenous people who cultivated that onion, the city is built over. The Chicago Blackhawks, excuse me, they ain't no Blackhawks. The Atlanta Braves, I demonstrated this past weekend with many indigenous people at the Redskins-Broncos game to welcome the Redskins. We all had signs about how they should change the name. Yesterday's issue, today's issue. Well, at the Iliff School of Theology, they had a book which they displayed at the library for over a century. One of two books. It was a book in Latin. It was wrapped in a human skin. Some settler murdered a Native American who came onto his land and skinned it and made the cover and gave it to the Iliff School of Theology, which proudly had it there until a student named Michael Hickox led a protest, stood up and led a protest about it in 1974, and then it was given to the head of AIM and some people who tried to who reburied it, did ceremonies in it. I think Olive kept the book. I can't imagine you keep the book. You don't have to be Jewish to know about lampshades made out of human skin. My friend Tink Tinker, the Native American professor there, he wasn't told that they had this exhibit when they hired him. He's writing about it now. Finally, one professor said, you know, by the way, we had a lampshade. We had a book cover. Redskins. It's innocent, right? It's just a 20th century view. There's something wrong with that, right? Dan Snyder, he don't get it. Dan Snyder, he don't know about lampshades made out of human skin. If you tried to do about Jews now in the United States what is done routinely about Native Americans, boy, there would be trouble. And boy, there should be trouble over this. Okay, I'm going to talk about John Evans a little bit, but I want to set John Evans. Maybe I'll set this one more thing. Right now in Congress, there is a fight about cutting food stamps. You may have heard this. Mitt Romney wants the food stamps that go to indigenous children. The poorest places in the United States are indigenous communities like Pine Ridge. And a lot of children, Gary was saying to me, about 10% of children from indigenous communities get to go to college, much lower than any other group. A lot of these kids depend on food stamps. What does it mean to take the food out of the mouths of the poorest people in the United States who have had ethnic cleansing, mass murder committed against them, who have generations of trauma? What does it mean to take that food away and to brag about the Redskins, the Braves, the Chiefs, the Blackhawks? I ponder that. Don't remember anything else. So about Mr. Evans. We are talking about the Second Civil War, and it's more than the Civil War. In the American Revolution, and before it, Bacon's Rebellion, black folks and white folks were actually united, to some extent, fighting against Native Americans. There was a book by Peter Silver called Our Savage Neighbors. Very good. Came out last year on this point. Some of the unity of the American Revolution itself was corrupt. In the South, what became the Confederacy removed the Cherokees and other Indians from Georgia and Mississippi, 5 tribes, who had settled and become agriculturalists. They wanted to steal the land, and they removed them. The Trail of Tears comes from after the Indian Removal Act passed under President Andrew Jackson, who was a big Indian killer, and generally a horror, by the way. They drove the Cherokee out of Georgia and Mississippi and killed a quarter of them on the march to Oklahoma. That's a prelude to the Civil War. I was shocked to discover that there was a memento to the anonymous soldier of the Civil War down in front of the State House in Denver, which has 4 battles in Colorado, every one of which is an attack by the U.S. Army on indigenous people, and one of which is the Sand Creek battle. And I mistakenly thought it was a statue of Chivington, and Chivington is up there along with John Evans and others, right in front of the state capitol. The Civil War in the West, starting in Minnesota and then in Sand Creek, but also the Bear River Massacre in 1863, January 1863 in California, and the ethnic cleansing of the Navajos in New Mexico by General Colton, was directed at ethnic cleansing. And because of the Sand Creek Massacre of the Indians who were the most friendly, who wanted to settle, this war went on for another 11 years, and instead of allowing any kind of even indigenous people who took up farming, they were all chased out and murdered. Every treaty signed by the United States was as worthless as paper. I mean, it was worthless. The Indians' word meant something, and the Americans' word meant nothing. U.S. governments would have. So in the course of this, the Sand Creek Massacre and Governor Evans' role, and I'll just say this briefly, is the following. The excuse for Governor Evans is this. Though he said, I differentiate between friendly and hostile Indians. Friendly Indians can come in. But if the women and children of hostiles come to the friendly camps, they must be chased out. And every hostile Indian must be killed. He said that on August 11, 1864. Now, that's a policy of mass murder. And everybody understands that when you kill innocents, when you kill the elderly and women and babies and so on and so forth, that's not good. It's against the laws of war going back to as long as people thought about this. Seems like Evans is heavily responsible just from that. And it seems like Evans is heavily responsible because at the Camp Weld meeting in Denver, where Major Wynkoop, who had gone and met with Blackhedel and the other indigenous leaders, and Blackhedel had acquired 7 white prisoners because he'd heard about this. And he sent a message, and Wynkoop said, I was in the party of the exterminators with Evans and Chivington. But then I talked to this guy who came in with the chief One Eye who had the message for him. And they were going to shoot him, and he said, why didn't you shoot him? The soldiers. And the soldier said, because he had a message for you. And then he talked to them. And the other guy, he asked the guy why he came. And he said, I didn't think it was right that that One Eye go along to be killed. I didn't think it was right. So I went with him. And Wynkoop said, I realized not only that for the first time that indigenous people are human, I realized that they are in many ways, they have nobler traits than we do. So Wynkoop took his forces out there and was surrounded, 140 of them, by 2,000 Cheyenne and Arapaho warriors, and brought back, and was very enthusiastic about it, the prisoners, freed them, and brought back the chiefs to Denver, and they came to Camp Weld, and he had to twist Evans' arm to meet with him at all. Evans didn't want to meet with him. Because of the killing of the Hungate family, which is, by the way, extremely suspicious. It is said on the gravestone that they were killed by generic Indians, but there were a lot of moccasins planted at the place, which is extremely unlikely to have happened except that some soldiers rounded them up. And I will say that the story which will come about this is, this was the one murder in the neighborhood of Denver. They let it go. They made a big thing out of it. They dug up the Hungates twice and brought them to Denver and displayed them and got everybody frothing with racism to go to the Sand Creek. Evans knew that there were friendly Indians. He tried to divide the friendly from the hostile. He just interpreted the most friendly Indians as being hostile. He wrote letters expressing panic about general Indian war back to Washington, while in the area he organized a militia and sent out, he has all kinds of things about how many arms he's going to send to particular people. The federal authority was a little bit different, but Evans speaks at this meeting of, he says, the summer is your time and you can attack, but the winter is my time. He takes responsibility for it. He says, it's my time. He doesn't say, it's Chivington's time. He says, it's my time. And Chivington said they could go to Fort Lyon with Major Wynkoop as if that would protect them. And it looked like they had been settled and protected. And in fact, all the young men had gone out hunting when they were attacked. And the reason that Chivington attacked them was he knew where they were. And therefore, because he couldn't catch anybody else, he get massacred. Now, about Evans. Evans left town 13 days before this occurred. He met with General Curtis in Nebraska on his way east. He hadn't been invited east. He went on his own. That's very suspicious. And they sent memos about a general Indian war along the Platte. and not about doing this operation in Colorado. So one of the issues that's come up among some of the historians is maybe Evans didn't know this was going to happen. Two things. Evans knew that Wynkoop already opposed the massacre. He hadn't wanted to meet at Camp Well. He wanted to drive out the Colorado Indians. Those were the Indians he refused to make peace with. Those were the Indians he had in his sights. When they went to Fort Lyon, there were 5 officers who stood up to Chivington, and they were threatened with death, and said, "This is a horror." 5 officers. They're very courageous. That was actually a good thing. And one of the things about this is you had to keep this raid quiet because they were going to go kill the friendly Indians to drive them out of Colorado so that Evans and Lincoln could run the railways through Colorado. That's what they were interested in. That was really a lot of the motivation of this. So I think that Evans has both the need for plausible deniability and the need for secrecy. So that it for me, carries no weight that he only focused on these attacks on the Platte, which were to come, he was to go to Washington and raise soldiers for them. So they were the future. These weren't the current attacks. He knew the attack was going in Colorado. He did not make a big point of it there. Far from showing that he wasn't responsible, I think it's perfectly plausible, and I think there are a variety of other reasons that he was responsible. One last point about it. Evans and Chivington were like this. Evans was the boss. He was the smart guy. He was the friend of Lincoln. He was the rich man. This whole came from a contribution of Evans in 1862, before Sand Creek. Right? He founded this university. He founded the Colorado Seminary, along with Chivington and Walter Newton Byers, the editor of the Rocky Mountain News. They're all big enthusiasts for Sand Creek. I found 20 telegrams of governor and his territorial governor and Indian agent Evans to Chivington in July and August, including one about something they had to meet with privately. They were on the board of the newly found Colorado Seminary together. They were Methodist leaders together. When they were around, they met all the time. I would just say, the thesis that Chivington was going to go carry out this attack on the Native Americans, he was there, whom Evans spoke of as it being my time to go kill them. My time, not Chivington's, my time. I find it completely unbelievable that Evans had nothing to do with this. Whether he knew that the attack was going to occur on November 29th, 13 days after he left, I don't know. That he knew that Chivington's job was to get the Cheyennes and Arapahoes and rid, this is what he said in 1884 in an interview with Bancroft, the founder of the University of California Library, H.H. Bancroft. He said, I had nothing to do with it, but it was a great thing. It was a great benefit to the people of Colorado that the Sand Creek Massacre rid Colorado of the Cheyennes and Arapahoes and relieved us of the enormous burden of the roaming Indians. Quote unquote. So you can keep your eyes averted from this, but if you look into it, there's a lot to be found. And we'll see what these committees come up with. But I think the basic point is, do we want a university where everybody is treated as a human being and we push for democracy, or do we want a university which is built on ethnic cleansing and will sicken both the indigenous people who come and any decent person? In the same way that if we had the Heinrich Himmler, if we lived in Himmlerton, right, somebody might notice that we were celebrating something pretty horrible, and probably, and I don't think it'd just be Jews, any decent person would say, we don't want to live in a place like that. No, we don't want a name like that. We don't want to honor that. No, it's no honor to be an Evans professor. Thank you. It's a dishonor. It burns. Thank you.
I think the first question, maybe the question that emerges in the minds of many students as we discuss this, and I want to read a question that one of the students asked. I won't name the student. The person can embrace the question should they wish. The question says, being an African American and having ancestors who were in slavery and treated horribly, I don't think that anyone today could do anything that would make amends for what happened. The way I look at it is that it's in the past. Obviously, if we could go back and change what happened, most people would, but there's nothing that could be done. Even if someone who had an ancestor who was a slave owner issued an apology, it wouldn't do any good. It would either be viewed as sarcastic or pointless. So why get caught up on who owes someone an apology? Instead, I feel like the main focus should be on preventing the many atrocities that are happening around the world today. I think it's a very important question. It's a question that I think a number of students ask in one form or another. That is, we can agree that the history is close as you presented, but the issue is, well, is there a need for the University of Denver or Northwestern University to act on this in 2013?
Well, it's a good question. But I think actually it overlooks the continuation of this very same thing. There's a wonderful book by Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow. Ain't read it, nor read it. You're going to read 5 books in the next 2 years. You might make that one. What it shows is that the United States holds in prison 2.3 million prisoners. It's gone down a little bit the last couple of years for economic reasons. 25% of the world's prisoners, more than China and all the former dictatorships of the Middle East before Arab Spring combined. It has gone up from 300,000 in the 70s to 2.3 million through mandatory sentencing, which is a disgusting anti-judicial thing passed by the former segregationists in Congress and the cowardice of the Democrats who didn't want to be thought bad on law and order. And for often possession of marijuana or having a joint and being black or Chicano, goodbye, and a lot of poor whites too. So one of the things is that slavery is no longer with us and Jim Crow is no longer with us, but the new Jim Crow is with us. And actually, political science meetings, I found out about 5% of black folks can get in the army now, even though there are a lot of people in the army. A lot of people don't even have that way out of ghetto. A lot of people are trapped in this. A lot of Chicanos are trapped in this. Give you some figures. In 2001, according to the Justice Department, a black male child had a 1 in 3 chance of being involved with the prison system. A Chicano child had a 1 in 6 chance, and a poor white child, or a white child, had a 1 in 17 chance of being involved in the prison system. I consider 1 in 17 to be enormously high. In Europe, that would be enormously high. Or I would say in a civilized country, that would be enormously high. So you might think that racism wasn't a big deal now, and that the issue of slavery isn't a big deal now, and telling the wrong story about the American Revolution isn't a big deal now. But I would just say, it's today's news. I mentioned this book, and I mentioned the Redskins. The Washington Redskins are parading around. They're going to be in Minneapolis. There's going to be a big demonstration in Minneapolis. There are going to be demonstrations against the Redskins. But the truth is that the demeaning attitude, the anti-democratic attitude, the racist attitude toward our fellow citizens and toward Arab Americans is very, very considerable. And the truth is that every group of Americans, the Italians got it, Sacco and Vanzetti, Jews, man, well, recently there's been a lot of, quote, success. There's a lot of quite ugly stuff about Jews, and as Arabs often say, like Edward Said, if you ask a Palestinian about anti-Semitism, they know about it. Anti-Semitism being both for Jews and Arabs. It's a turn the point. It's the same stuff. So my own view of it is that this is today's news. And that every police shooting of a black teenager, I did some stuff about Trayvon Martin. And I would just say, you think it's yesterday's news, it isn't yesterday's news. Stand your ground laws, the American Legislative Exchange Council, that's the slave masters, man. The Republican Party, well, there used to be an anti-racist party, Lincoln, right? And there were still some people, moderate Republicans, but since the Karl Rove previous, whatever that guy's name was, Lee Atwater?
Yeah.
Right? The Southern strategy, they wanted the Klan members, or the Democrats, to come over, and they got it. So you might think that this is all yesterday's news. But I would just say, I'm putting it in very sharp terms about black folks. And I could elaborate this for the rest of the period. But I would just say that Native Americans were more wiped out and have fewer representatives. Right? There are more black folks, even at Northwestern, than there are Native Americans. And one of the things about it is you might think that it's somebody else you're talking about here. But it's you and me. It's not different.
Okay, I'm going to throw the floor open for discussion, but before I do, I want to introduce two people who are in the audience. And the first is Heather Menifee. And Heather is one of the leaders of the Native American and Indigenous Student Association. If you stand, is Forrest here?
I don't think so.
Okay. And then the other student I'd like to introduce is Bethany Hughes. And Bethany is involved in organizing a group of graduate students and faculty who are interested in investigating issues on the graduate level of Native Americans and indigenous people. And importantly, not just in the context of the United States. But I shouldn't have said Native American, but Native peoples and indigenous peoples.
Well, if you take the Americans.
Right, but including in throughout the globe. And so Bethany is, I thank both of you for being here. Now, questions?
It's fine. Let all the other voices come forward. Right? There are a lot of people who are worried about this. So it's fine. Ask whatever you want. Yes.
I have two kind of empirical questions. What is a John Evans professor?
The John Evans Professorship is the highest award which the University of Denver can offer to its distinguished faculty members for their research over a career. And it is used here, I believe, to attract outstanding professors to the university. And a lot of the people who are honored by it are very serious scholars. And so the idea is, if there's an honor you can give to somebody for doing good work, and they have a big selection process. In my school, it's been a very secretive selection process for some reason. This is what you do. So, just as the names of the cities and so on, there's a big investment of these schools in the Evans professorships.
I think, I think I may have mentioned to some of the classes that when I was named John Evans professor, I was of course gratified by that and it was flattering. And I said, I don't really know who John Evans was. I mean, I know he founded Northwestern. There's a John Evans Alumni Center, and here we are in Evanston. He must have something to do with that. Maybe his parents changed their name because they wanted to, because they were living in Evanston. But I wanted to find out who he was, and so I, did what all of you do when you have an academic question. You go to Google, and and that's what I did. I looked up Wikipedia, and there was information, and I checked a few other websites, and very quickly, perhaps within 45 seconds, because I have a short attention span, I
You're
discovered
smarter than me, man.
that John Evans had this history. And when you become named professor at Northwestern, you're supposed to give a talk. And of course, I talk whenever I can about reputations. So I'm going to talk about reputations then. And I began my talk by talking about 10 or 15 minutes about who John Evans was. And in the room, there were all these administrators, the deans, the provost, and their jaw dropped. They had never heard these stories. And in fact, this university was almost entirely ignorant of their history at the same time they were saying that John Evans was our most important benefactor in the 19th century. Second question?
Has Northwestern asked you to be involved in the research process?
No. But what happened was actually somebody from here, I put out a blog, Individuality. You Google that, you get it. Or if you give me your email, I'll send it. And I was writing about this, and someone from here wrote to me that the issue had been raised by the indigenous students. And so, suggested I volunteer. So I wrote a letter to the provost saying, I was an Evans professor and I'd be happy to contribute, and heard nothing back. But I have been in touch through membership on the committee which was dealing with this at the University of Denver, where it's one more integral to the university. The 150th anniversary of the University of Denver is next year. And the 150th year after the Sand Creek Massacre is next year. And they are intimately involved. And honorably, the chancellor and the provost want this going because they don't feel that a university which lives in pretense about this, while affecting interest in knowledge and the truth, that took Gary a little bit of time and then presented it, right? You really have to have a committee examine whether it's the case that Evans was an enabler of Sand Creek. He was either an enabler of Sand Creek or the brains of the outfit. I think he was the brains of the outfit. But there's no disagreement among historians that he was the enabler of Sand Creek. So, anyway, we'll have to see about this. I would be happy to talk debate, argue with anybody, anytime about this. And I'm now conducting a debate with some other historians about some of the evidence. And hope to figure out what's true. I think that there's a lot of evidence from the point of view I offer here. I certainly don't have evidence that Evans met with Chivington privately, non-Camp Weld, and talked specifically about his taking out the Cheyenne tobaccos. I doubt that you need that in order to have the influence that Evans did myself. But you could argue that. So we'll see what comes up in the argument. But I think that the nervousness about it, maybe I could say one other thing. The president of Brown, whose name now escapes me, I believe it's Ruth Simmons,
Yes.
a black woman. She looked at Brown and she realized that they didn't talk about John Brown, not the John Brown, she was the great abolitionist who gave his life fighting against slavery. But John Brown, the American revolutionary slave trader who founded Brown University. And so she went back and she created a commission to look, and they have had an honest assessment of their history. Emory University has done a fair amount about looking into their history. And if you go to the web, and we have a portfolio at the University of Denver, our committee does, and many of what schools have done. When you're dealing with slavery, you know, there's a fair amount of going back into this. When you're dealing with indigenous people, you know, it's like the Wild West. And we don't know from that. And you know it was barren land, it was a land without people for a people without land, the slogan, the misleading slogan of Israel. The Palestinians were in Israel, and the indigenous people were here in America, and they were killed and driven out. And if you want to have a decent place, somebody had better acknowledge that and do something about that. I'd be a Jew, as far as I know. I spent a lot of time fighting Nazism. You know, you talk about how nothing bad happened with the pogroms and nothing bad happened in the concentration camps in Europe. That's not going to be very helpful. Right? So, yes.
So what do you think the role
Louder?
Yes. What do you think the role of universities like Northwestern or Denver should be? So if, for example, they decide that we don't want to have John Evans professors, we're going to call them something else, and we will remove the name of John Evans from different associations or different buildings. This is not very difficult to do for a university, but it's not going to change any of today's problems that you're talking about. The fact that today there's still problems with indigenous people that they don't access university, which is something that's also very related to the university. It's not just discrimination, for example, in food. It's in accessing university, and this is the university. So how far, in your opinion, should Northwestern or Denver go if they want to be serious about it and not just say something that doesn't cost anything and doesn't help anyone?
Well, there's several things. One of them is you can ask the descendants of the indigenous people who have not been included in the Northwestern process, but who are included, or meeting with them once every quarter, and they see all our stuff. So we'll have a discussion. That's one. The second thing is, I mean, I don't want to, let's put it, there are 5 of us Evans professors who think this name is an atrocity out of about 15. But there are about 5 who, you know, until the spotlight is shined on them, they ain't going to move. The trustees are not going to be swift to move. The provost and the chancellor probably aren't going to be swift to move. If they think really it's a mystery and had to be investigated for a long time, and they couldn't decide what to do about it, I'm sorry, that's just false. There's plenty of evidence. There's the evidence Gary found. I would be happy to talk about this, and for that matter, Gary Roberts and Elliot West, which are the leading historians about this, or Patricia Limerick would be happy to talk about this. There's no disagreement about this. So it will take an enormous effort to move this, because the stake here in it is very, very, very high. Because you have to really change the mindset and make the place more welcoming, more democratic for all the students. Now, what should you do? Well, there are 2 things. I think that acknowledgement. Nobody is going to bring back possession. And nobody can unmake the fact that America is built in crime. The crime of slavery, the crime of ethnic cleansing toward the Native Americans. I live in Colorado, ceased from Mexico in the aggression of 1846-48, along with the Wild West of Mexico. You may have noticed Los Angeles. That's not a Mayflower name. You know, we got it created. And one of the things about it is, you might think it was yesterday's news. Here's another bit of relevance. The brother of Glenn Morris, a Shawnee Indian, was in Iraq, and he was on the border in 2003. And he and 2 other guys were standing around without their helmets on. And the colonel came up and screamed at them, "Get your helmet on!" I guess that would deal with the poison gas that they were rumoring that the Iraqis had. Right? And he said, "Gentlemen, that's Indian country. Why we got Tomahawk missiles we're going to fire into Syria? Tomahawk cruise missiles? How come every helicopter in the occupied territories that Israel flies is an Apache purchased with a special subsidy they don't tell you about bipartisan subsidy, about 20%, from American companies through American military aid to Israel. How come they got these names? You might think it was yesterday's news. A lot of black folks don't want to be over there fighting. Black population is more against the war in Iraq than any other part of the American population. How come you're over there fighting with tomahawks, et cetera, et cetera? You might think it was yesterday's news. So I don't know how to move this. All I know is it'd be good to move this. Now, one other matter. You can't make over the history entirely, and there's some value in leaving, not having, it's like the South and Jefferson Davis. I mean, everything is to John Evans. Mount Evans, the front of the state capitol, Evans Boulevard, Evans Chapel, the Evans professors, Evanston, Illinois, University Hall, the Evans Alumni Association. So, frankly, honoring indigenous people and doing some to trim this down and pointing out that really, the main thing, let me put it to you this way. He's a second-rate abolitionist. He didn't fight for it. He committed ethnic cleansing. He committed ethnic cleansing as part of an apparatus that committed ethnic cleansing. But he was so outstanding in the horror he committed. Read Silas Souls and Joseph Kramer's letters. By the way, Ben Nighthorse Campbell just read them into the congressional record, and everybody voted to create the Sand Creek Memorial. And the Sand Creek Memorial is very honorable because it's a memorial to the massacre that the U.S. Army committed. It's a really honorable thing that we have that. It's way out in the middle of nowhere in Eads, Colorado. Nobody goes to see it. It's really a good memorial. It's a horror because of what they did. But it will persuade you that if we think that the U.S. Army did heroic things in all these battles and they named everything for indigenous people, it's like, all these names, Mississippi and so on and so forth. All the land we stole, people gone. Oh, we got the names. Nobody knows what they mean. They sound nice, right? Allegheny. Doesn't it sound nice? They're really beautiful names. Make you feel better about the Anglo-Saxon conquerors. But if we don't redress this, whether we go into Syria, even Barak, we didn't want to do that. He was about to go into Syria. We had to all stop him. He would have gone into Syria. If we want to turn around American militarism, we're going to have to deal with it. Want to continue on this point? Others? Yes?
I have a timeline question about the events surrounding Sand Creek and the couple weeks leading up to it. And John Evans leaving 13 days before it happened.
Mm-hmm.
What was the state of protection or not? What was the policy as set by him upon his departure regarding these peaceful Indians? Did he make a specific comment saying, all right, y'all nobody touch the Indians while I'm gone?
Are you kidding?
Or, no, I'm serious, because what I'm wondering is if Chivington had a record of disobeying a senior officer. And if he didn't, then if that omission is he always followed the rules, then by going and doing this, isn't that an implicit statement that that was understood, that he was to go and do that while the boss was out of town?
Yes, you're looking at it as an ordinary person and not believing the fantasy. So, yes, Chivington obeyed orders. That's one thing. Now, the direct order for this did not come from Evans because Evans was not his commanding officer. And Evans' line at Camp Weld was, it's out of my hands, it's a military matter, you'll have to deal with the military people like Colonel Chivington. That was one thing he said. But then he said the truth. The summer is your time. But winter, the time when I can attack you, is my time. Active, first person. Chivington was there, Chivington heard it. Chivington spoke, he said, you can go with Major Wincoop, and they had no reason to believe that they wouldn't be safe doing that because he was a major, right? the whites who were very patronizing and unutterably stupid. I mean, really unutterably stupid. A great father in Washington. Evans is the little father. You know, they talked to the Indians like they were babies. The Indians made fun of them, which it wasn't hard to do. You know, these were characters, stuffy characters out of racist characters out of Mel Brooks or something. But with horrible consequences. Anyway, as far as it went, Shivington knew that Evans wanted him to take out the Cheyennes and Arapahoes, the roaming Indians of Colorado. So you're right. Actually, at the meeting at Camp Weld, Evans says explicitly that's what you should do. And the federal hearings afterwards, there were 3 hearings, and they all found that this was a massacre which was so bad that, this is the words of the Joint Congressional Committee on the Conduct of War, it is unimaginable that beings in human form can have done this. And they fired Evans for it. So the idea that anybody thinks, except, you know, I mean, again, it's like the Confederacy, it's like irredentists, right? We're out in a place where it was built on this racist mob going out and cutting children out of mothers' wombs and taking toddlers out into the desert and letting them go, among many, many other things. Parading around with the body parts of women. They cut them out and they paraded with them in Denver. Evans was there. When I say that this book was bound in human skin, it isn't something else, something distant from this, it's this. And that's why, as I say, I think you were asking a very straightforward question about it. And to me, if you just look, if you look, you use your eyes, and you're not entertained by the racist phobias of white folks, it's as clear as if you're reading Nazi texts. It's as clear as if you'd be in a Ku Klux Klan meeting. It's as clear as Memphis just changed the name of Jefferson Davis Park, the city council, and Nathan Bedford Forrest, the slave owner, head of the Ku Klux Klan, January 2013, had to rush it through because the state is going to kind of intervene to save its great historical tradition, but they changed the names. It's as clear as any of those things are clear. And the truth is, I don't, you know, for me, I wasn't part of that. I see no reason why any decent person should support it. And if I had been, because everybody's ancestors have done bad things, and as far as I know, Joshua fit the Battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down, that's actually genocide. So I'll just say, the song and the reality are 2 different things. And the Jews fled slavery, and that was great, is a good thing, and the Jews murdered Canaanites and others is not a good thing. I don't want to be part of the group that murdered the Canaanites. Sorry. I don't want to be part of the people who murdered the Native Americans. I don't want to be part of the slaveholders. I want to make a nice start. I want a democracy that doesn't send Tomahawk missiles anywhere and doesn't spend $1 trillion on the military intelligence budgets and cuts back food stamps for indigenous and other poor children so that Mitt Romney and company and the Democratic rich people like Jamie Dimon can make even greater fortunes. I don't want any of that. I think it's all connected. I think you pull at any piece of it, and if you see it right, you'll suddenly, all these other things start shaking. And that's why, by the way, it ain't going to go peacefully, because the people who are privileged around here do not want this to change. Because if it changes, God knows what we're going to be questioning next. Yes?
So if I go back to the historical responsibility issue, historical responsibility, and I can't stop thinking about whether there's his family is still here, like a John Evans family, where they're descendant, and how they actually react to your finding or to you in any chance. And
well, a friend of mine, well, a person my wife is in the writing group with, wrote a biography of Anne Evans. And Anne's daughter. And she went and she worked with the Hopi Indians, and she was the founder of many cultural institutions in Denver. And the woman came and presented to the Women's Library Group, and 3 members of our committee went, and one of them was particularly horrified. I just raised a sort of, as she put it, softball question about whether Ann Evans was trying to make up for Governor Evans's horrors of Sand Creek because she's so friendly with the Hopi. She said, you know, she studied in Paris as a painter, and she said, well, if I had to go to the afterlife, I'd like this. If I could, I'd like this. I think I'd be happy to spend half the time with the Hopis and half the time in Paris. That ain't John Evans. He wants to spend half his time with the savages. Her answer was, Sand Creek, horrible, Shivington. John Evans had nothing to do with it. Wow. So they could be doing their best not to notice. And there's some people, you know, one of the things about it is people don't carry this kind of, I mean, it's very bad for the spirit to do this kind of stuff. And it has all kinds of effects. And it's very hard to carry this. So I don't think that everybody in the family probably feels that way. They contributed to the Cheyenne-Arapaho run from the Sand Creek site down to the state capitol in Denver. They have a marathon every year about this on the anniversary of Sand Creek. So there is movement there. But I expect that the research, if noticed, will be attacked. And I made a big effort to get it into the Denver papers, but I had a hard time when my school had the misfortune of inviting George W. Bush, the torturer, the international war criminal who can't travel abroad, and the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, called for his arrest the day he left office. So I wrote a letter to the Denver Post about it. It finally got in. They had pro and con. Because my school, unfortunately, invited Bush to be its speaker at its dinner. I suspect that it's going to be, as this comes out, and as we get on to 2014, it's going to be very difficult. I think that the Chancellor and the Provost rightly have the hope that people of goodwill and decent people will see that if the U.S. Congress could vote almost unanimously to create the Sand Creek Massacre memorial, maybe it's time that we shifted it. They created that some time ago. You can read Harry Kelman's book, Misplaced Massacre, about how the site of Sand Creek was lost and how they figured it out to make the memorial. But I think that a lot of people, well, I'll put it, really sharply, nowadays, Barack and others have succeeded in making it so that gay people are not, and lesbians are not victimized in the U.S. Army in the way they were. And young people just don't seem to be enthused about, crucifying adults for whatever they want to do that doesn't harm other people. It doesn't seem to have to be a big thing. And I think that the ideas of settler colonialism will pass. So I think that there's an older, powerful group that wants this issue to go away. And I think all of us who understand the truth and who understand what it is to build a decent and democratic university and society will keep telling them, no. Don't sweep this under the rug. We don't want to wear Ku Klux Klan hoods to our graduation. We have medallions. John Evans, the Evans medallion. It's like a medallion to Nathan Bedford Forrest. It's like a medallion to Jefferson Davis. You wear that medallion, you are wearing the medallion of ethnic cleansing. So my own view is that everybody, those who believe in this, should be told by the rest of us, that's dishonorable. Shouldn't do it.
I will mention one thing that Alan didn't touch on, and that is that the Evans family, about I guess it was 13 years ago, there was a move in the state of Colorado to change the name of Mount Evan And there was a columnist for one of the Denver newspapers who wrote a series of articles about that. And the Evans family, which still lives in Denver, is quite wealthy, quite powerful, wrote a defense of John Evans. Not a total defense. I'm saying Sand Creek, as Professor Gilbert said, Sand Creek was wrong, but John Evans really wasn't intimately involved in it. And they sent a copy of that defense to our president at the time, who noted it. We don't know how he responded. He didn't respond publicly, but he put it in the archives of Northwestern University. So we know that as late as 2000, maybe since then, the Evans family has been in touch with Northwestern and seeing this as being one of the places that is interested in John Evans's good reputation.
Thank you, I hadn't known about this.
I would like to hear more about the Cheyenne and Arapaho representatives that your committee is working with, and what their input has been.
What
their input has been.
Well, David Halis works very closely with them, and so far, they know about our work, and they are to come to the meeting on November 15th. And so we will have direct input. And the aim is to make whatever we do responsive to their voices.
In terms of changing the names of things that are named after Evans, for example, like Evanston, the town. Well, of course, when they changed the name, it would obviously bring a lot of attention to what he did that was wrong. After it, would that, the same way be glossing over the problem because it would be forgotten post the change of the name?
Well, I don't think those two ideas work together. One of the things about it is, you change names, it doesn't feed poor people on the reservation. So I went to this demonstration about the Redskins. If you change the name, it doesn't feed the poor people. On the other hand, if you change the name and raise the issue, maybe people would like to go shake the Congress people who were stealing food stamps from children to feed Jamie Dimon and Mitt Romney. So as far as it goes, it seems to me they go together. I'll say for myself, sign me up. You want to have big protests about the, these cutbacks of food stamps? Man, I'm ready to go. And you want to have a big protest about the Redskins? Well, as far as it goes, I'm ready to go. And part of the thing is, as with Arab Spring, if you examine the history of Egypt, Mubarak was a brutal American-supported dictator. We gave him over $1 billion a year of weapons. Every year for 30 years he was in office. And we were reluctant to criticize him. Hillary Clinton clung on to the very last. And Barack finally changed and gave a beautiful speech about the power of nonviolence, about 6 minutes, which I heard downstairs at my school because there's a television. I took a class down there to watch it. And they couldn't print it in the New York Times because it was too eloquent. Talked about Gandhi and King and so on and so forth. The guy actually knows about the power of nonviolence, not that he practices it. How did this happen? Well, this flower seller who had been a student in Tunisia burned himself and despaired when a police officer harassed him and wouldn't let him sell his flowers. And Tunisia exploded. And several people burned themselves in Egypt, set themselves afire. And it didn't produce anything. But this young woman, Asma Mahfouz, she went out to demonstrate on National Police Day because they killed a 17-year-old kid. And the men in her family told her not to go. So she made a videotape, which you can still see, in which she tells them off. She says, come out. She says, be men. And who would have imagined it? They were. All those people came out, and 3 weeks later, Mubarak fell. Now, did it change everything in Egypt? No. Did it change American military aid to Egypt? No. And there are big questions about how you continue even nonviolent revolutions. But that this was a great equitable thing, and that Asma Mahfouz ought to be a name that everybody in the world knows. Everybody, just like Malala. Everybody knows her name. Everybody should know her name. So if you haven't checked it out, ASMAAMAHFOUZ. Others. Yes.
I was curious to get your thoughts on sports team names of other groups like the Minnesota Vikings with the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Just wondering if that's often a common retort that people give.
Well, again, there are levels of things. The Irish have certainly been treated badly, but whether the Fighting Irish is a problem for Irish people, I doubt at this point. But I could be wrong, and I'd be interested to hear about it. With regard to indigenous people, from coast to coast, there were, God knows how many, I've heard estimates between 10 million and 40 million indigenous people here when Columbus came. They're now under 1 million. Under 1 million. It is one of the great genocides of all history. So I will just say, whatever we decide about, whether, I don't know, the berserk qualities of Scandinavians, this is an insult, I don't know. But that the Washington Redskins mean the skin that bound the book at the Isle School of Theology, a Methodist school founded by John Evans and John Chivington and Byers and so on, that's what it means, is, I'm afraid, undeniable if you notice. And the question, the effect of the question is to deter attention from this real horror. In the same way that if we had the, I don't know what the equivalent would be, but the Washington Kikes, and with a, symbolic lampshades. I think probably people would feel like that was a pretty awful thing, right? But hey, cowboys and Indians. Aren't the cowboys the good guys, and aren't the Indians the bad guys? And isn't it right to put down the Indians? Isn't it heroic that the U.S. Army, which celebrates every one of these massacres, they have museums at Fort Sill and West Point for all these massacres. And that's why they have this idea that when they go into Iraq, it's non-white people, it's Indian country. It's Indian country. Indian country. You want to come back on that, or could you go?
Could you speak to what you have done to move forward from this?
I'm not quite sure what you're asking.
I just feel like I think that the point of bringing this up and the significance will be lost if nothing is done to move forward from this. So I was just wondering what you've done to help move forward from an incident like this, and like the stigma, and then make a community more welcoming to indigenous peoples, or if you've reached out to them to see what they personally feel should happen.
We have 2 representatives of indigenous students who are having many activities at our school, on our group. And personally, I intend to take into consideration whatever indigenous people want to do. One suggestion is that we have fellowships at the school for indigenous people to go through the University of Denver. That's a small suggestion. There are many other possibilities. I myself am probably going to write a book about this, because I want to talk about the Second Civil War and how it fits into what the South did in the general genocide. And the Civil War combines a noble effort to free the slaves. And in fact, the Emancipation Proclamation meant that 80% of the soldiers after they were recruited on the northern side were black, and that all the people rose up in the south. Sherman's march through Georgia was horrible because of what Sherman did, but also a lot of slaves burned the plantations. That's kept under the wraps. People liberated themselves to a very, very strong degree. And I think that this story about how carrying out genocide toward indigenous people has been linked to the importantly racist character which has undercut American democracy, represented by slavery and Jim Crow and the attitudes toward the Mexican people whom the U.S. seized during the War of 1846, and all of its enterprises, like Woodrow Wilson, that great hero, in addition to admiring the Klan, overthrew the government of Nicaragua at the time and saw a clerk in an American mining company as the head of Nicaragua. That was the predecessor of Somoza. Because, you know, mining, you gotta have it, right? And after Haiti, the great slave revolt, in 1916, Woodrow Wilson overthrew the democratic government of Haiti in one of the great crimes of the century. And we hear about Woodrow Wilson as if he's a great guy. I just heard John Stewart interview an author of a book on Woodrow Wilson, the greatest of all presidents, and the sixth president. I'm an American political scientist of the American Political Science Association. Very, you know, be good to get this history straight. And one of the things is you can like the good things. I like Wilson on collective security. I wish there would be more of them, right? You don't have to dislike everything about it, but the idea that we're going to lionize people who did horrors, I don't know. I don't see why we should, myself. Yes?
So then what is the next step after, like, is this, like, acknowledging that this is the history of this, like, I guess kind of branching on this moving forward question, like, is that significant enough, just the acknowledgement that this happened, like, do things need to be changed or renamed, is that significant enough? Like, what do you think should be done to, like, to try and, I don't even know, like, make up for this in some sense? Like, there's value in having this acknowledgement and this story, this history told correctly, but what goes beyond that? Like, what can we do?
Well, I would again ask the indigenous people, including the descendants of Sand, the people who were massacred, what you would do. To me, acknowledgement is, there's no healing of this. There's no making it right. There's no making America a decent place, frankly. But we could make small improvements, and we could create a basis for going forward together, because between war and ethnic cleansing and the climate, we're going to make this planet uninhabitable if we don't make some improvements fast. Yes, you wanted to ask another question?
Yeah, just kind of, why haven't you reached out to them yet? Because I feel like your history is like very influential, but I feel like it's obviously significant, but that's not the point. The point is to create a better future. And like, I just wonder why, like, you've gone so long, like, studying this and have yet to reach out to communities affected by this.
Well, you misheard me, okay? I've been involved in this issue since January, okay? And I have been deeply involved in research on it because I don't want somebody else's view. I want to figure out the truth. As far as it goes, I'm involved with many indigenous people, including on my committee, and we are working with the representatives of the Cheyennes and Arapahoes. And one of the things about it is that is a demand which has been made here by the Native American students, and it is completely dishonorable to say that only the inheritors of the ethnic cleansing and Evanston and Northwestern should be included and not the descendants. So I would turn the point around. I think this is a reason for Northwestern to get involved with the descendants and to make an effort to get the voices of indigenous people heard about this. And one other matter, I'm not the arbiter or the representative, right? I'm just somebody who, because I was named an Evans professor and because I hate racism, I will do what I can to expose this and change this in conversation with other people. But ask yourself about it, because one of the things about it is, here you have, in these classes, a wonderful opportunity to think about these things. Other people right here believe what you believed until these classes, right? You have a wonderful chance to share some of this information with other people and start a conversation. What should we do? What should a community do? How do we make a democratic community? If we can't make the whole area democratic, what can we do as a university? What can we do as faculty and students and people who work on campus? Because whether this is a decent place depends on whether the people here are decent, meaning whether people speak up.
We're getting close to our ending time, and I thought before we let Professor Gilbert go, I wanted to channel my inner conservative. And so what I want to ask is, throughout this nearly an hour and a half discussion, we have heard a lot of criticism of American society. And conservatives will often say to progressives, well, all you want to do is tear us down. All you want to do is point to the bad things in American history, whether you are right or wrong in pointing those particular bad things. And I wanted to ask you, after that, recognizing that complaint, for you, what is the heart of patriotism? What does being a patriotic American mean to you?
The good part of the American founding was the Bill of Rights. The good part was the recognition of, for the first time, equal freedom. That it wasn't up to a monarch to make war or assign taxes, but that we ourselves would have a legislature which would decide on taxes and whether or not the United States would go to war. The aim was not to have militarism, but to have a citizen army in which America would be less inclined than a monarchy to wage war wantonly, or as Kant put it, as a personal pleasure party. This is a great thing in America, and it has been fought for from below at the time of the Revolution. It has been fought for by the abolitionists, led by John Brown and Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. It has been fought for by the union movement from below, by the welfare rights movement from below, by the civil rights movement from below, by the anti-war movements from below. Patriotism in the United States is not my country, right or wrong, and butcher anybody you like as long as there's money in it to pay us off. It's all those people who stand up for equal liberty, and that every one of us deserves not to be ridden over, but to have a voice and conscience as long as we don't go lynch other people. That's a great thing about America, and it's a great thing about the democratic movement in the world. And the truth is that we will not solve global warming. The people who solve global warming in New York, you can hear it on Democracy Now! This morning, are the people from Occupy Sandy, who went out to help people while the New York City government was busy infiltrating Occupy. They couldn't send out anybody to help the people on Long Island who didn't have electricity, but they could put cops at Occupy. I'm for the America which those people represented and which want to help people. Just one other thing about it. There's a new FBI director whose name is Comey, Jim Comey. And Comey in the Bush administration stood up for the rule of law and to withdraw the torture memos. And he was made the head of the FBI by Obama. And some partisan Democrats don't like that. He decided to have every FBI person go to the Martin Luther King Memorial in Washington and consider all the horrors of what the FBI did that led to his assassination a year the day after he gave the speech breaking the silence. He's my kind of guy. That is to say, I'm a patriot like he's a patriot. I want America to be a decent place. I want America to stand for equal liberty. I don't like wars of aggression, meaningless wars of aggression and torture in Iraq or toward Native Americans. I want that acknowledged, and I want us to move forward from that. And if we can't move forward from that, we're not going to survive as a species.
Professor Gilbert, on behalf of our classes, I want to thank you for joining us in that very eloquent conclusion. And again, anyone who would like to join us for dinner, come up to the front and we'll get organized.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna run over.
Okay.
Thank you.